Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog and the beginning of a new series of updates. New York City-in-decline update, or NYC-in-decline update. The reason for this new series is, as I've mentioned in the past, you already know this if you've been watching these vlogs a while. If you're new, then I have to explain for a second that I used to live in New York City. I lived there for 40 years. I moved to Tennessee about a year ago. The reason I moved was because the quality of life and the cost of living in New York had gotten so bad and so high, respectively, that I had to leave the city. I couldn't stay there anymore. But I used to love the city. I love what New York was. I hate what it's becoming or going back to, though I think it's getting worse than it was when I first came to New York, before Rudy Giuliani became mayor and improved the city immeasurably. The difference was night and day. But again, I still have an affection for the city, so I keep up with events there, and I do go back to visit. I was back once. I plan to go back once or twice a year. So far, I plan that, but if things keep getting worse, maybe I'll just say one day, why bother? But I see so much happening in New York. I was going to do one story, one particular topic today about New York, but two other things happened in rapid succession at about the same time, and I realized that there is so much going on in New York, so much evidence of the decline, that I really need to do a whole series and cover multiple stories instead of just focusing on one story. So the first item, and I can be of some special help here because it has to do with real estate, and I am a licensed New York real estate broker, and I still work with people back in New York. That's one reason why I was able to move, because with the internet and the phone, you can do so much that I don't physically have to be there as long as there are salespeople there, which there are. So on to the story. Judge orders controversial condo tower 200 Amsterdam Avenue to remove floors. The soon-to-be tallest building on the Upper West Side might have to be trimmed at the top. A state Supreme Court judge ruled earlier this week that the city must revoke the building permit for the nearly completed 55-story condo tower at 200 Amsterdam Avenue, and that its developers must remove a yet determined number, that should be probably yet to be determined number of floors, because the structure exceeds zoning limits according to the nonprofits behind the lawsuit. The ruling by Justice W. Frank Perry in Manhattan on Thursday was a major victory for the nonprofits, who argued that the 668-foot tower was constructed on an oddly shaped, quote, gerrymandered, unquote, lot that abused zoning rules to maximize its height. Quote, the directive to partially demolish the building is appropriate given the willingness of the developer to ignore every sign that their project was inappropriately scaled for the neighborhood and based on a radical and wildly inaccurate interpretation of the zoning resolution, unquote, said Elizabeth Goldstein, president of the Municipal Art Society, one of the two groups that brought the suit. Critics have charged that the permit should be rescinded because the developers have misconstrued the language from a 1978 DOB, Department of Buildings, memo on rules for assembling air rights from adjoining zoning lots to allow taller buildings. So what are we talking about here? What is an air right? That is something you may not see in other cities, but you see it in New York. What air rights is that there is, well, it has to do with these nonprofit groups. They want their neighborhoods to look the same. They don't want any change in their neighborhoods. They especially hate tall buildings. So there are these zoning restrictions on the height of buildings. That's why you have large population in New York City, and you have expensive housing, and you have all these little brownstone apartments of 3 or 4, maybe 5 floors that cannot accommodate the population. So these buildings stay the same size because the residents want their neighborhoods to be quaint and look the way they always have. So it is very hard to build a tall building in certain parts of New York, but there is a way for a developer to get around that. Sometimes it's by buying air rights. Now, what is an air right? There is something called floor area ratio in New York City, which is assigned to particular areas. So let's say if an area has a FAR of 2, that means that you can build a 2-story building on that plot of land. Or you can build a 4-story building if you have the building occupying only half of the lot. You see how that works? The point is that there is a limitation on the heights of buildings. But if a FAR, let's say, that's what they call a floor area ratio, we in the business, so we just say FAR. If the floor area ratio will allow, say, a 10-story building in a particular area, and you have one of these 5-story brownstone apartments, you can sell the air rights above the building, the allowance of 5 more floors. If a landlord wanted, the landlord could tear down the building and build taller, could tear down, say, a 5-story building and put a 10-story building in its space. But of course the problem is that you have rent control, and you have people who won't move because you have this limit on the heights of buildings. It limits the number of apartments you can build, and that keeps the housing prices so high that nobody moves. They live in a rent-controlled apartment with a low, below market rent. If they move, they can't move to another apartment in New York. They'll have to pay 2-3 times the rent that they're already paying. What they end up doing is what I did. You have to just leave New York because you can't afford to live there anymore. So what happened apparently on the Upper West Side, this 200 Amsterdam Avenue, is that you see, you can buy these air rights. So if you're a developer, you can buy the air rights of the building. They must be adjacent. You can buy the air rights of the building on one side and the other side, and that allows you to build a taller building. So if you have a 5-story building on either side and the FAR allows 10 stories, then you can buy those air rights and you can build a 15-story building. But it's possible there's a domino effect sort of that you can use, where once you buy the air rights of the building next to the land or the building where you want to build, then, or demolish an existing building and then build there. Once you buy the air rights next to your property, you can buy the air rights to the next building over, the building next to the building whose air rights you just bought. And you can just chain these buildings effectively one after the other, and then you can, as happened here, build a 55-story building if they follow the letter of the law. But this judge, as we have all these liberal immigration judges ruling against the president on immigration, this judge decided that the building is out of character with the smaller buildings in the area, which it is, to be honest about that. So this judge ruled that the developer has to demolish a certain number of floors, say the top 10 floors of the building, to make it smaller. This happened many years ago when I first came to New York, by the way, on the Upper East Side, where a building was built. The developers made a mistake and they built it 10 feet too tall, just 10 feet too tall, and a judge forced them. They had to demolish the top floor of the building. The problem is that what they should do is they should just increase the air rights so you can have tall buildings in that whole area and accommodate the large population of New York. But the people, it's always these nonprofit groups, they want their neighborhoods to look the same, which raises the question, what if liberals had been running New York in, say, 1820? Well, here's what New York looked like in 1820. It would, well, actually, parts of New York looks just like 1820, these small 3- and 4-story buildings. And that's what New York would probably look like today if liberals were running New York in 1820, because they wouldn't let anybody build a taller building. That's the problem on the Upper West Side, because now that this tall building has been built and these air rights have been purchased, once you sell your air rights, they're gone. You can't get them back, and then you can't, if you have a 5-story building and you were allowed to build a 10-story building and you sold the air rights to the additional 5 floors, then you cannot build the building larger. So you would forever have this tall building there and then all these smaller buildings around it. That is one of the crazy things about New York, and the result is, well, I hope the developers win the appeal. They're appealing the decision. Hopefully they'll win, because if they follow the letter of the law, then they should be allowed to build the tall building. But that's one factor of New York's decline, the high cost of housing. Now on to the second item. Squeegee men, scourge of the 90s, are back in New York. Are you wondering what a squeegee man is? Well, you're lucky to have me here, somebody who lived in New York City. You can also read the article, though, if you want to know what they are, but to experience it is a whole different ball of wax, which I have. I didn't own a car in New York, but I would drive with people sometimes, and these squeegee men, what they are is they're bums. They're bums that stand on street corners where there's a traffic light, or under a bridge entrance where there's a traffic light, with squeegees, that's why they're squeegee men, and buckets of soapy water. You stop for the light, they run out in the street and they just chuck a bucket of soapy water across your windshield. They grab their squeegees and they start cleaning off the window that you didn't ask to be cleaned, and then they demand money from you for this service that they performed, and they can be very aggressive if you don't pay up. Rudy Giuliani got these guys off the street. That was one of the first things he did. That improved the quality of life. Remember what I said? If you watched earlier vlogs, I did an earlier vlog about Rudy Giuliani and his embracing of the broken windows theory, which is to go after this small, petty type of crime, this quality of life crime that makes just daily life unlivable. That's all coming back now. The squeegee men and the graffiti on the subways, which I think I discussed earlier, which made it just depressing to sit on a subway. And now on to the third item, something else that's coming back: crime. Thousands of Manhattan moms form anti-crime group amid rising lawlessness. They're the real housewives of fighting crime. A band of Manhattan moms are trading luncheons and play dates for political lobbying and police meetings, all in the name of protecting their kids from rising crime, bail reform loopholes, aggressive panhandlers, and what they see as a general return of lawlessness. The 2600 Mother movement formed on the Upper West Side in the fall when a string of high-profile muggings and a playground shooting put the family-oriented neighborhood on edge, and one woman decided to do something about it. Quote, "My background is in finance and nonprofit. I'm not like an activist or a crusader. I'm home with 3 kids," unquote, said Upper West Sider Elizabeth Carr. Quote, "I started in the last year feeling like we were seeing homeless encampments pop up, regular panhandlers in our face, and walking through clouds and clouds of marijuana smoke with my kids at 8 a.m. Carr has been personally targeted for her activism. A group of homeless people who lived for weeks on the sidewalk outside the old Ansonia Hotel at Broadway and West 73rd Street taunted her by hanging a cardboard sign in front of their encampment that said, quote, Elizabeth Carr Homeless Center, unquote. And that's another factor. Besides the homelessness and this rising crime, their brazenness, the brazenness of these people who don't fear the police anymore because of this bail reform that the article mentions. In case you don't know what that is, ordinarily you would arrest, well, this is what Giuliani did. You would see somebody, a fare jumper or somebody molesting somebody on the street, you would arrest them, put them in jail, and then you would have bail. De Blasio got rid of the bail. These people are let right out onto the streets where they go out and commit crimes. As I said, I'm doing this series because there are so many of these stories now that I can hardly keep up with them. There are 2 or 3 more that I could include that I didn't. A guy walking down the street of Broadway and 84th Street, which is, or Broadway and 88, no, Broadway and 84th, which is just 2 blocks above the Broadway and 82nd Street Barnes & Noble bookstore. I used to hang out in the cafe there at the end of my workday just to chill out. So he was just walking down the street and somebody just threw him on the ground from behind and grabbed his cell phone and ran off. Somebody tried to steal my cell phone. I was just sitting on the subway and I happened to be sitting by the door, and suddenly this hand reaches in and this guy tries to grab my cell phone right out of my hand. Fortunately, I was quick enough, to stop him. Well, I didn't see the homeless encampment in front of the Ansonia because it wasn't there then, but it looks like things are getting worse. I used to go home from that Barnes & Noble I just mentioned. I would catch the subway. There's a major station at Broadway and 72nd Street. The Ansonia is just a couple blocks above that, and that's where this homeless encampment now is. And I remember seeing a tent on 6th Avenue and 57th Street where I used to catch the bus. You would go into the Trader Joe's. There's a Trader Joe's at 72nd Street and Broadway. You'd see homeless people sitting on either side of the Trader Joe's. Go into a Starbucks on the Upper West Side or other places, a Whole Foods, and you see homeless people. They are just all over the place. I'll see if I can dig up some photos off of my cell phone. If I had the thought of keeping them on my computer somewhere, of homeless people just sleeping in the subway stations. It's just getting worse and worse, and it is so sad because Rudy Giuliani cleaned all that up. And now it's going back to the way it was when I first came to New York in 1977. Not only that, it looks like it's getting worse. I guess I'll just have to end for today on that sad note and say, as usual, thumbs up if you like this video. Share with anybody you think would also like the video. Got any comments? You can put them in the comments section below the video. You can put suggestions for future topics, and you can subscribe. I love getting new subscribers. Subscribe. Oh, and you can vote Republican if you live in one of these liberal cities that are just being destroyed by liberal government. Not just New York, but, well, Detroit is probably too far gone to save, unfortunately. But Detroit, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Baltimore. That's my advice. You don't have to take it, but if you live in a liberal city, smell the coffee, wake up, smell the coffee, vote Republican, and finally, come back and see me again. I look forward to seeing all of you again, and until I do see you all again, bye.